We are talking trains today. We're talking the Valley Railroad. We have Karen Davis, who's a photographer. We'll talk about you in a moment. The president of the Valley Railroad, which is Bob Bell. Vice president and engineer, David Conrad. Let's talk about why the Valley Railroad in Connecticut, located in Essex, is such a wonderful place for our state, a tourist attraction. Why is it so fun? And how many people go there a year?
A few questions. There you go.
Yeah, here we go.
It is fun because it appeals to all age groups. It appeals even to the little children. It's amazing how the little ones know what a steam engine is. And part of that, I think, is from Thomas the Tank Engine. They see that on television a lot. And there is that generation that their parents took the train. Their grandparents, that was the only real way to travel from city to city, and even from local cities and towns. So this is a very nostalgic revisit. We call it a travel in time.
Speaking of which, look how you're dressed, and you were dressed as what?
Well, it depends on what the crew was calling me that day. I've been called a railroad baron, but most of the time I'm the riverboat gambler, and then I remind them I signed the checks. So that changes.
What do you do as president of the Valley Railroad? Is it just the gamut of things? What do you do as president?
It's a lot of things that we have to do. We have a lot of activities and a lot of special events and a lot of special programs. And it's keeping a lot of balls in the air. We've been very fortunate in the last 10 years to see an increase in our revenue and an increase in the people that have come and enjoyed the special programs that we've put on.
How many people come a year to the steam train?
150,000.
150,000. All right, let's segue into David. You're an engineer, you're vice president, you know a lot about the steam engine, which when you go on board the Essex Steam Train, you see the steam. How important are all of you to the rest of the country that are still operating these kinds of trains?
Well, we help each other out. You know, the steam locomotive fraternity is a rather small group. You know, at one time there were steam locomotives everywhere. Now there are very few steam locomotives, and so those of us who work on them, we know each other and we exchange information. We exchange sometimes parts, tools, all sorts of things go on between us and the other steam locomotive operators in the United States. You know, at one time there were over 180,000 steam locomotives in the United States. Now there are less than 200 that operate. And so there are very few steam locomotives, and we're lucky to have 3 of them right here at the Essex Steam Train and Riverboat. I'm
going to ask this question. It's a very probably stupid question where you're coming from, but how does a steam train run?
Well, a steam locomotive is powered by steam. We get the steam by boiling water. There's a fire in the firebox, and the locomotives at Essex Steam Train and Riverboat are coal-fired. The coal that we burn is special coal. And by law in the state of Connecticut, it has to be less than 2% sulfur content, and to keep our neighbors happy, we burn low volatile coal, which produces no smoke. And so we're fairly environmentally sensitive. The coal burns, it boils the water. The steam collects inside the boiler and comes under pressure. The engineer has a handle called the throttle valve, and he pulls on that, and when he opens the throttle, steam goes from inside the boiler down to the cylinders. Inside the cylinders are pistons. The pistons push on a series of rods which are connected to the wheels. The wheels go around and the engine moves.
I love that, and that's the answer. All right, to tell people how that works, you all have gotten together with Karen B. Davis to take photos, and you've got an exhibit running at the Oliver Jensen Gallery that runs through October 27th, and you, Karen, have named this On the Job. Let's look at some of the pictures that you've taken, and between the 2 of you, 3 of you, let's talk about what we see here. David, I'm going to let you take this. What's happening here?
Right here, we have one of our guys, Wayne Hebert, who is in charge of the boilers and the firebox maintenance on the locomotives. Wayne is doing ultrasonic testing of the inside of the firebox of our number 97 locomotive. This is in preparation for its major 15-year inspection, which we haven't quite started on yet, but we're preparing for it.
Sounds like a long process. Karen, as we look at this picture, You had a lot of things you could have taken pictures of, and in all the exhibit is 60 pictures. Why did you pick that?
Well, actually, David curated the show, and going in had a very good understanding of the kind of images he wanted. So he was actually a great art director. And
But you're putting your bent on this. I love how this rack focus thing is happening. David, what is this?
These are just some wrenches that we have.
Just some wrenches.
They're impressive wrenches.
But they're
because
antique, I'm sure.
They're antique, but they're impressive because they're very large wrenches. The largest of those wrenches is about this long. And we don't use these every day, but we have to have these because certain wrenches fit certain parts which we have to work on maybe once a year, maybe only once every 2 years, but we have to have the right tools.
Now I'm thinking, Bob, this has got to be an iconic picture because this is, you know, how
That's
it
what
rolls
makes it go.
down the track.
Yep, that's where David was mentioning. One of those rods is connected to that wheel, and then that's the driving rod. Then there's a main rod that connects all of the driving wheels together. And that little lever that's hanging down, that's part of the valve gear that actually times when the steam goes into the cylinder to determine somewhat how fast it goes, how much steam gets used, and make it go backwards. If it's set to a particular way, the engine will, of course, reverse.
Karen, you were brought on to do this, so on the job, and we're looking at another picture, through a photographer's eye, what were you trying to capture for them?
well, the texture of the place. I'm naturally drawn to textures and patterns and repetitive shapes, so I think a lot of that comes across. And also, at the same time, documenting what they do in their jobs so that there's a historical record of this bygone era.
That shot that we just saw, I love that font. That's an old world font. Is that original from David, from back, or did you kind of make your own up?
Well, the section at the top there, Valley Railroad Company, is taken from the New Haven Railroad script.
That's, I recognize that.
Right, and below that is just typical railroad block letters.
Okay. As we go through these pictures, lighting was important to you, Karen, when you did this, and why? Did you shoot any at night or all during the day?
No, it was all during the day, and sometimes we didn't have the luxury of lighting or lighting a scene, but sometimes I got really lucky. One morning, early in the morning, I caught this bluish pink light on the side of the locomotive. And then when we did the shot of the locomotive where the wheels were taken off, that was when I had to light. And I must say I was going nervous into it because I didn't know how I was going to light this dark locomotive. But somehow I put the lights on the side, they popped off, and gratefully the ceiling and the sides were silver and white and highly reflective, and it just worked because they could not go back, and if I didn't get it right the first time, and say, well, wait a minute, put the wheels back on and let's try it again.
So you get lucky as a photographer sometimes. Why is the Valley Railroad so important to the state of Connecticut?
We are an economic driver for the state of Connecticut. With that many people coming to visit us, there's a standard formula that's used when a tourist comes and the amount of money they end up spending. And we're in the millions of dollars as an economic driver for the state. We're just off of Route 95 on Route 9, and we've been able to convince a lot of people going through to stop off and come and see us.
And it's a great place for children. You also have a river boat. You know, once you get into that Essex area, that's awesome and fun to do. What don't you have that you need? Because on shows like this, I always ask people, what do you need? Somebody sees this or hears about what you need, maybe they can provide it for you. So what's missing? What do you need? How do you want to grow it?
A good question. One of the things that we've been starting to work on is being able to take the knowledge of the fellow sitting to my right and others that are in our shop.
Have you met David?
Yeah, hi. There is a knowledge there that on restoration, on keeping equipment and so forth going for future generations. And we're in the planning stages now to be able to develop a program to take that knowledge and instill it on a new generation. And that's a program that's going to take a fair amount of money, some time, but we think that it's very worth saving and preserving.
History cannot be forgotten. You feel the same way, David?
Well, one of the things about the Valley Railroad, Essex Steam Train and Riverboat, is that, you know, we look like a museum, but we're different than a museum.
But you're not stuffy in any way.
We aren't, but the big difference is museums have their artifacts on display. Ours have to operate, and our locomotives and cars go out and operate every day just like they did when they were originally built. We have coaches that are nearly 100 years old. We have a locomotive which is just about 90 years old. And so we're not only preserving the artifacts, we're preserving the technology and the skills necessary to restore this stuff and to keep it running.
Who has come to you as of late across the country, in Europe, wherever, that needs help on a steam train?
I had a call early this week from the Heber Valley Railroad in Utah, and they're in the process of putting a new firebox in their number 75 locomotive, and they were looking for some advice, and I was very happy to provide some insight into doing that sort of work, because that's a project that we have undertaken. One of the problems with steam locomotives is that they don't need new fireboxes every year. This is something that lasts for decades.
When things were built to last.
Indeed they were. So even though we've replaced a firebox, that doesn't mean that someone else has done it. And so we share information back and forth between the various organizations in the country that operate steam locomotives.
And if you don't keep it alive, it dies. Like you said, all
Right
of
you
that
are.
knowledge.
Yep.
What did you learn from taking all of these pictures, Karen?
Well, for me, it was amazing to...
Because you love to travel.
I do, and I love history. I really love history, and I really appreciate what they're doing down there. And that was one thing I was really happy to be a part of, was recording this bygone era, these moments in time. I don't know if I learned anything technical about how steam trains
talk to
operate.
David and Bob after.
Because when Dave was describing, you know, how the steam train runs, I really didn't know. But I just appreciate being around anything that's old and antique, and when life was a little easier in certain ways, you know, and being in a place where time stops, so to speak.
Well, here's my plug for everybody to go to the Essex Steam Train and find you, David, and you, Bob, and if you're hanging out on the train, you know, talk to you too about the pictures, because it really is an amazing place in our state and great for families, and we need to keep it alive. And thank you for all of you for doing that. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having
Sure.
us.
When one they send, who's this girl? Spend all night kissing, and if one was right here, then who else is missing? Got a little sidetracked to find myself wishing to find the keys to the door, but it's also a metaphor. Things to keep locked in the grocery store, but mine just to save time. Skip right ahead to the last ride. The harder we look, the less we can see. Don't you know, that you need me.